So we're going to explore the nature of existential propaganda, which is considerably more virulent than other forms of political propaganda that we are all familiar with. The overt examples of it, say within the Soviet Union, is very easy to identify. We could even look at the way, obviously, of manufacturing consent through the mass media. And so in that way, you can get certain narratives are seeded and ultimately disseminated in order to push a particular agenda. But that form of propaganda is always subordinate to the existential propaganda. And I want to explore the way how existential propaganda is considerably more virulent because people don't recognize that the totality of our communications equals existential propaganda. And so the way how that we frame that is through the questions that we refuse to ask when we are given as the principal product. We're given as interchangeable economic units, demand centers, credit instruments, the fucking consumer that you are. So if you look at it along those lines, what we're doing is we're always questioning what it means to be a consumer by looking at the production process. And then we're looking at, well, is the way how that we are sold. And so that means to say that the way how we're sold or what we consider that we're orientated towards for our lives, does that partake of the same propaganda machine, the same machine that we're not aware of? We can easily explore this through the institution of money. Because if money is considered to be neutral or as considered a value in reference to what we do, then as I always are at pains to reiterate, that is subordinate to the principal claim that's made on time that's given as marginal, or the way how you sell yourself on the divide between your labor and your leisure. So if you're orientated towards the marginality of your time, your value, well, it obviously legitimizes the claim that is always transcendent to it. So once again, you produce the consumer to place yourself in so you can be orientated towards life as a compensatory exercise, and so therefore see money as a means of exchange or something that's neutral. But ultimately, the use of money the use of a credit you are not the originator of, ultimately has a value judgment. And this is what I'm at pains to explore when you're looking at, say, time or the way how we produce ourselves. And so therefore, if there is a claim that's always transcendent to the way how we sell ourselves otherwise, or the way how we sell ourselves on our money making, does that mean that our money is essentially the principal tool for existential propaganda? And ultimately it is, because if you think that the people think of, say, let's look at gold as an example. So gold is considered to have intrinsic value, and so as a result of that, it's because it's considered to be immutable. And so because of the convention of people, maybe its association with the sun and with, say, God not being able to tarnish, you can understand why our descendants considered it to be this quasi-magical kind of thing, and the reason why, obviously, it being beyond incorruptibility, we could say that it became, say, a vehicle for value. But if we think of it that supposedly that the value associated with gold is inextricably connected to its intrinsic worth as a thing, well, we're not really looking at the way how that any form of money markets a way of life to discount other ways of being or doing. So it doesn't matter about the form of money when you're looking at what money ultimately markets. So if money's primary goal is to market its use, when you're looking at money as a social convention, it really doesn't matter about the form of money. And this is the issue that you're kind of seeing now with Bitcoin or other cryptos or distributed ledger technology, because in the context of all these different, say, competing forms of credit or competing forms of means of exchange, and so therefore there's always a value proposition in reference to it. What are they trying to claim? Well, they're trying to claim the buyer's journey that's been set for its use. So if you think that the question of, let's say, the question of money or credit is, you're looking at it from the aspect of parasitism and central bankers and the erosion of purchasing power that comes with parasitism, and inflation and all these other things. And so therefore you're looking at it as forms of money. Well, you're not looking at the convention of money. And the convention of money, when you're looking at it as the object par excellence, we could say to market the way how life is given as a buyer's journey. That means to say that if you become beholden to the narratives there, you won't question ultimately what its use is essentially marketing. It's marketing the totalising claim of a buyer's journey. Because if you're orientated towards life marginally, once again, you see life marginally through the value proposition of your time. And in doing that, you produce the consumer as the investment vehicle to actualize your life. So you're investing in your redundancy, because what you do is that you legitimize yourself as an economic agent orientated towards life with an interest. You economize, you're not creative. All right, and that's the thing. So you see life as a compensatory exercise. And so the question of credit is always in reference to the spirituality. And if you get beholden to different forms of payment or means of exchange, then you're not looking at the spirituality that actually underwrites the convention of money. And this is the issue. We always explore this from the totalising claim that's made on time. So once again, if you associate your time with value, you see life marginally. And so therefore, why is that an issue? Well, you're orientated towards life through discounting. Because if you think of because you use money as a tool for thinking, and the money as a tool for thinking is predicated upon what? Well, you're absencing ultimately the credit of the agency that you're not credited when you're given as a consumer. So the principal product is produced, you're orientated towards life marginally or as a value proposition or as a compensation. And so therefore you're orientated towards life to discount other ways of being and doing. All right. And this is the critical issue here, is that if you're dealing, why is this an issue now? And why is the issue of credit becoming more acute with the failings of, say, the US dollar and obviously the debt associated with it? And this is not just the dollar, but it's all fiat currencies. Well, you're ultimately dealing with the question of credit that has nothing to do with money, all right? Because once again, different forms of credit, the only thing that they do is substantiate life as a totalising claim of a buyer's journey and the command economy. So once again, do you have a choice on the way how time's given to you? Is that yes or no? All right, think that through. Because if you don't have a choice, then you are commanded to produce yourself as the principal product and to invest in your redundancy so you can be replaced. And so once again, the question of credit enables you to look at it in a way where that convention is a form of propaganda. Because let's say, how can we say it's a form of propaganda? Well, if people actualize the self, and to actualize the self is the marginal self, because ultimately you produce the consumer and you sit in the consumer vehicle, okay? That's what you've done. And yet you will dislocate the self, because once again, you see life marginally, and so you see money as a means of exchange, or money as a value proposition in reference to the way how your time's given to you. And so if you are sold on money making, that is the principal existential propaganda, because through doing that, you discount thinking, obviously, because you have to discount thinking, because you're not questioning the nature of the credit that you use, which has got nothing to do with the means of exchanges, but it's got to do with your existential status when you're given as a demand center. You discount, obviously, the agency. If you're looking at it from investments, you've got to think that any investment that you make in the consumer is looking at it from the aspect of the return that you can get. So the return draws from the agency that people are credited when they're reduced into a consumer. And I can't, you can understand that if you're looking at business and the way how entrepreneurs are orientated towards, say, an opportunity within the market, the consumer acts under a miraculation. So they've got a customer first orientation, and they discount the production of the consumer. And so therefore they region risk in reference to the return, but that return is based upon the agency that does not change when you're given as a demand center, because your agency does not differ over in your entire existence. It's there to be told. And so therefore, if you get sold on money making, you get sold in a way not to see what you outsource or what you externalize. And so to externalize here is to externalize the production process. So what is the means of our production? How does that occur? Obviously, and the discounting of other ways of being or doing or other forms of credit. This is ultimately what it comes down to, because you have to change the credit from the ownership of credit to the credit of ownership, and the way how you could rethink distributed ledger technology in reference to that, because ultimately it's the way how that you credit people, all right, and to do justice to people rather than people being as a means. But if you see, and so in that way, if everybody is sold on life as a compensatory exercise, it means to say that you allow middlemen, arbiters, any form of mediation between you and your life. How can we say that? Well, at the core of existential arbitrage, you've got to think you're the principal product. There's only one trade, is the absence of creativity. So what happens, and I talk about this at length, is that if you see the economy has got to do with goods and services and ultimately not to do with the principal product that you're given as, then you see the difference in value that predicates exchange. I value this more than you, so therefore, and you value what I've got more than you, or the money that I have, and yet you exchange. Yet what predicates that is the absence of creativity that is applied to both parties. That's the key. So how can we say that? Well, ultimately what you're doing is, if you're both economic agents, which is what you are, you only have a marginal interest. So therefore, the way how that you're orientated towards destiny or legacy is impoverished, because what world do you share as economic agents? The question of culture has been eviscerated. And so it becomes, like I always say, it's become an asset on a balance sheet, and it's got inextricably connected to the use of a credit you are not the originator of. How can you animate goodwill if it's been usurped through parasitism and through the way how that you are sold on money making? You are sold on existential propaganda. You are sold not to see where you are when you invest in the consumer vehicle. Once again, if you're beholden to an unavowed utopianism through the way how time's given to you, because you're not going to be spatially orientated towards the market for your time, you're beholden to that command economy. And that's why the question of credit becomes so paramount now, because all the latent authoritarianism within our way of life is coming to the fore. And so the questions of central bank digital currencies and tokenization and programmable money, they're not. It's to restructure you. You're a credit instrument, once again. So if you don't look at propaganda, but then relate it back to the way how that you're sold on life not to see what you discount or what you are not credited, then you won't get a view to the ultimately to the scope, the nature of the actual intractable. What you'll do is that you'll get beholden to narratives that regions propaganda into the machinations of power. But once again, you're the product. So in order for you to see, say, to invest in a narrative, be it conspiracy or mainstream or whatever, you have to be sold on a narrative. And so therefore what it does is that regions the off message that is totally off into audience capture, and then it plays towards the inherent biases that we have when you are beholden to, say, a narrative. And so you're either going to reinforce something, or you're going to discount it out of hand. So when you step back from that and you ask these fundamental questions about your existential status when you're given as a principal product, that is an off message. So it's totally off, and as a result of it being totally outside the bounds, then what it does is that off message is looking at the totality of all communications has been racked up in existential propaganda, because it's dealing with your existential status when you're given as the principal product or as a credit instrument, as a demand center. And if you can't start to see it outside, like from an alien's perspective, let's say, look at it from that perspective. This is why maybe talk of aliens occurs. Think of it if you're a person. If you are somebody that came from outside the solar system and then started looking at these fucking people and the way of life that they've set up for themselves, and look at it from an outsider's perspective, and then think, what's the questions that these people don't really ask themselves? Think about, they're given as economic agents. They legitimize the use of a credit they are not the originator of. They allow parasitism. They think time is of value. And so they look at life marginally through the return that they get, and through the return that they're orientated towards, they discount other ways of being or doing or thinking or their spirituality, because they see life as a compensation. Their life is not actually, their first birth is not good enough. They have to be twice born through the use of a credit they're not the originator of, through the transition of the child becoming a credit instrument. Their parents bequeath a way of life where that child that has innate kind of creativity is told to become a credit instrument. They bequeath the totalising claim of a biased genie so they can be marginally given, so they can invest in their redundancy. If you don't look at it like that, you're never going to look at the totality of any form of communication. And so I always come back to this, like, am I trying to sell you something? Is this a totally off message? Am I full of shit? Is it I'm trying to sell you? What am I trying to sell you? If I am going to sell you, like, what could that possibly be? Or is it literally the only thing that I'm trying to get people to see is the nature of their existential status through questioning, like a fucking alien, totally outside the bounds of Saturn, as it were, or totally outside, the black cube and all, if you want to fucking put it in these terms and all that bullshit. Look at it like that. You're seeing it from outside the way how that we've constructed reality based upon the way how that we linearize time through the way how that we're marginally orientated towards life. And ultimately that it can be reduced down into existential propaganda gets seeded into the parents in order for them to say that, hey, you've got to get ahead in life. But how can you get ahead of a totalising claim of a bias genie that's been set for your aspirations? Once again, do you have a choice on the way our time's given to you? If you don't ask that question, well, you won't see the nature of the existential propaganda that you're beholden to, and you won't really see how any political propaganda is subordinate to that, because you have the most power. So the 99% in the world are the ones that create the world, and the sooner that we realize that we have externalized our agency, as soon as we start to take it back, you'll see a change. And so because you remove the question of credit will change. And so therefore the way how you get sold on your actions will change. Anyway, food for thought.